High Water Box on the Box Rock and Celluloid Bike Rock for short, I'm over box. So I've been going through my old ticket stubs recently, and I thought I'd do a little trip down memory lane on a few of the ticket stubs I'll show you and just talk about the gig. So I mean sort of handling things over here and bring them over, but we'll start with this one. So that's Ozzy Osbourne live at the Manchester Apollo. Check the date, it was February the 14th, Valentine's Day. No, yeah, February 14th, Friday. Valentine's Day 1986 was the first proper gig I ever went to. Prior to this, I had been to see a cover band at a school that my mate went to. So that was the first live gig I went to, but the first proper gig was Ozzy. So Rat was supporting, because this was a great double bill, so I got to see two of my favourite guitarists of all time on the one gig, which of course Warren Martini, and then Jakey Lee. What I remember mostly about it is that Rat opened with Dangerous But Worth the Risk. The volume was immense, and if you're aware of the song Dangerous But Worth the Risk, Warren Martini hits third fret. Is it or just over the second, between the second and third fret harmonic on the G string after the first chorus going into the verse, and this thing just exploded out of the speaker, and I just never heard anything like it. I just couldn't believe it. Stupidly enough, Rat all did solo spots, drums and two guitars, even though the support act. Obviously, I'll have seen the solo spots at the time, but now I just think like that's ridiculous. Ozzy was in his Liberace phase, you know, he had his ridiculous outfits on, and they're promoting an album that wasn't great, but I do kind of prefer it to Bark at the Moon. But Jake was great. I remember doing Killer of Giants in particular. You can check out videos from these shows on there. So it was a good first gig. We waited outside trying to meet Ozzy, but of course nothing happened. And the next one I went to was Accept. There we go, at the Manchester Apollo. But that wasn't to see Accept, that was to see Dokken, and that was on the 8th of April 1986. So the interesting thing about this was the same day we got the Turbo on by Judas Priest. That must have come out on the Monday, and we got it on the Tuesday. So we recorded it before we went down the car and listened to Turbo on the way down. I really like Turbo, and I enjoyed listening to it, and I still like it. So I went to see Dokken again, seeing probably my favourite guitarist of all time, biggest influence. I loved it. Obviously, seeing George, his hair was dyed black. I think he was using that guitar with kind of lightning bolts on it. I think it was a Kramer or a Charvel. All I remember, his hair was very spiky, very black. Dokken were really good. I mean, looking back now, I think Don Dokken wasn't a great frontman. And I think what I always remember about the gig was how good Accept were. Accept, I wasn't there for Accept, but they put on a great show. Udo was great. The whole performance was excellent. This was on their Russian Roulette tour. You know, it's kind of one of those things where you get to see a great show by a band you're not expecting that. So that was another good one. After that, I went to see Bon Jovi. We're not going to that. Here's another interesting one. This is AC/DC. Horrible tickets. So there we are. This is the beginning of the era when big venues start to print generic tickets. Awful. What's interesting about this, I went to see Dokken again, but to me, they were sort of lost in the arena. This was on the Back for the Attack tour, and weirdly enough, I'd seen Heart a few days before the same venue, so that had taken some of the excitement off. But again, I saw AC/DC. I'd been into AC/DC as a kid, so it was like, well, I'll watch, AC/DC, the headline act, even though I was there for Dokken. But AC/DC was brilliant. Not on the great album, just on the Blow Up Your Video album, but the opening was brilliant. They had loads of roadies came out dressed as Angus to the kind of Who Made Who trackers. That got some kind of pull-off intro. And then Angus appeared, the real Angus appeared out of a tube in the middle behind the drum riser, and it was all great theatre. I remember it was massively loud and a massive top end on Angus's guitar. I think in his solo spot, I think I went to the toilet because I couldn't take it, but AC/DC knew how to put on a show, and it's that thing, even when you weren't, a band like that wasn't doing a great album, had sort of fallen by the wayside album-wise for the last few albums, these touring acts still could play to big crowds because they put on brilliant shows. Next one, I should really look at the pre-run, but let's look at Donington 1988. So there's the Iron Maiden tickets. So we got this like virtually the day before. Me and my mate went down last minute. And we decided to hitchhike. So I just turned up without a sleeping bag or anything. I just had this fantasy that I'd get to Donington in one night, find a barn, kip in a barn. We'd go to Donington, kip in a barn again and go home. This isn't what happened. We started hitchhiking from junction 36. Which is the junction you get off of Kendal. We got picked up, we got as far as like one of the services, I think, near in the Manchester way, and then we couldn't get a lift, and then, we got picked up by this guy who was like a London guy. So my first experience of someone from kind of down south. He wasn't Southern accent, but he was kind of very well-to-do, sort of the different sort of cultural difference between North and South. He was talking about going to the Michael Jackson show. And I kind of realised since then, he was like, we'll call a Nuggets gig going. He'd gone with his family, you know, you get your Nuggets family who just goes to like see Ed Sheeran or, you know, whatever. And it was like that, going to see the latest show. And obviously we were going to Donington, which is a really specific thing, and he probably just didn't understand what heavy metal was whatsoever. But anyway, he dropped us off at some service station. We couldn't get a lift for a while, and then his trucker gave us a lift, and we told him where we're going. He's like, oh, well, I'll drop you, you know, by Dewsbury outside Leeds, and then you can get like a lift from this junction here. Anyway, we went there, we got stuck, we couldn't get a lift. We went down to like a hotel, there was a chip shop next to it, got some fish and chips or whatever, came back. And we ended up sleeping the night by the motorway up on the hill. Obviously it was absolutely cold, even though it was summer. I barely kipped. Then we went back on the junction the next day, then we managed to get a lift all the way to a service station by some lovely old bloke, and then we were waiting in the services, and of course there was lots of people going to Donington. Had stopped at the service station, some lads kindly gave us a lift all the way to Donington Park. We went in to watch the show. We watched all the bands. What I remember about this, we were there for David Lee Roth, who was excellent, but of course this was the famous Guns N' Roses show where the two fans got killed. All I remember was it was crowded, it was big. I think David Lee Roth was trying to calm the crowd down as well. Obviously his set was after the Guns N' Roses. I do remember being hugely impressed by Guns N' Roses. They put on a great show, they were really good. I went and bought the album afterwards, but I never really took to it. But weirdly enough, Kiss were on next to the Iron Maiden, and we decided to go home. We'd seen David Lee Roth. I didn't want to see Kiss, and that time I really couldn't be doing with Iron Maiden in that time. They're always winning polls, you know. So we walked out of Donington, walked up to find a lift somewhere. I can't remember. We ended up getting a lift somewhere to some motorway services. And then did we get picked up by some like religious girls? Girls are very religious, talking about the church. So we got dropped in the middle of some junction in the middle of nowhere. This wasn't very Christian. And we got stuck again. So I slept by the side of the road. Then the next day, I can't remember who gave us a lift, but I think we got a lift to Sheffield train station. God knows what route we went. And of course, we got the train back from there to Preston to Lancaster and got home. We managed to phone my mum, who was worried sick, 'cause we'd gone dark, we hadn't been in touch. This is before mobile phones, you know, you had to go to the phone box. So it was a right old deal, but it was worth it to see David Lee Roth, who actually saw the next gig. The next gig I saw was David Lee Roth at the NEC. Let's pick another one here. This is Joe Satriani at the City Hall. So this was like seeing a big guitar favourite. This was on the Flying in a Blue Dream tour, May 1990. A couple of tales about this. One of my mates had backstage passes, but I knew another guy, mate, who was in a band with, who's very disgruntled that was going to meet Satriani backstage because this other guitarist said it's more important that I meet him. I mean, this guy's a great guitar player, but you know, it's not more important that my other mate meets Satriani just because you're like a top guitar player. So anyway, that was an amusement thing. But Satriani came out bathed in blue light, broke in the feedback, and went into Flying a Blue Dream. And this was it's a pretty famous show up in North of Newcastle. Satriani was great. You know, it was really good to see that kind of music done over that period of time. Next one's a really again a beloved gig in Newcastle. Again, look at it there. So you got your City Hall ticket for Satriani. A year later, the beginning of generic horrible gig tickets. But this is Queensryche with support by Lynch Mob at City Hall. We met the band afterwards, and there's the signatures. This was an amazing gig. Lynch Mob supported. Got to be honest, George, the sound wasn't great. George's strap fell off in Mr. Scary, and only Logan as a frontman seemed a bit lost. Lynch Mob, it's that thing where they made a really good album, but like probably hadn't done much on the road. And by this point, Queensryche were incredibly well drilled. They'd done 2 albums to support loads of big bands. Obviously, learned their lessons. And amazingly as well, even though they're on a huge album for Empire, so 3 albums, they still played Mindcrime as an entirety. It was brilliant. The light show was brilliant. Everything was spot on. His sound is spot on. Queensryche, they're not the most sort of metal performers, but they knew how to work with what the hand. Jeff Tate's a very good theatrical performer. This was a brilliant show. And after the gig, we waited. There was like a line to meet Queensryche, but we spotted this bloke in a t-shirt with messy grey hair. It was Peter Mensch. And I said to the singer of our band, or maybe he did, there's Peter Mensch. We went and gave him a tape and had a patter with him. Of course, we never heard from Peter Mensch because our tape was a bit shit. All I remember about Queensryche is obviously Scott Rockenfield had chains on his drums that kind of held up the cymbals, and asked Jeff Tate, I said, how do the chains, how do they hold the cymbals up? And he goes, it's magic, in that top Jeff Tate voice. So that was cool. Let's have a look at another one. We're going to do a Priest one. This is Priest at City Hall. You can see it there. Another generic ticket. Quite a nice rat one above for the Mayfair. Only ever saw a couple of gigs at the Mayfair. This was interesting. The previous time I seen Priest was at the Manchester Apollo and Ram It Down to, and not a great album, but Bonfire supported Cinderella for the rest of the dates, but it was a good show. With this one, Annihilator supported, and I remember, no, I'm not into Annihilator. Jeff Watts had a right hand like a jackhammer. He's very good, and they're putting a good show. And they were kind of heavy, and obviously that fitted with what Priest was doing. Look at this £10 a ticket. Wow. A lot of these gigs I've shown you tickets for are all under 10 quid. I think Donington was only 14 or 17 quid. So anyway, Priest, I remember Halford coming out, had this big metal, big leather jacket on with metal crosses hanging down. You kind of chewing gum. But I remember being, I wouldn't say underwhelmed. I did really enjoy the gig, but I think Rob maybe wasn't as engaged by this point. You can find footage of him on the Painkiller tour in the US, where they did an amazing show on the Operation Rock and Roll, I think, from '91. So I don't know, maybe a little jaded, but it was interesting to see them on that tour. They did play a really cool set list. By this point, they had loads of great tracks. Let's pick the next one completely. I'll tell you about these 2 gigs. This is Riverside. You can see this is Newcastle venue. They're literally just right. The gig in one's King's X, one's Extreme. These are both 91. The King's X gig was phenomenal. Again, quite a well-known show in Newcastle. This was on the Faith, Hope and Love tour. By this point, they're really well drilled. It just sounded like the record. They were so tight. It just blew me away that people could play that well. This is probably the gig along with Queensryche where the standard of musicianship, the standard of playing and the ability to reproduce the sound was like really inspirational. It's something I've never accomplished myself, but anyway. The next gig, Extreme. This was interesting. I was really into Extreme. I really liked the first time. I was really into Pornography. It was like no. But by this point, it got popular with More Than Words. We went to the gig. It was a cool venue, very sweaty gig, but just something didn't click with me. I kind of saw all the things I didn't like about Extreme, all the busy arrangements, the songs too long. I didn't like Gary Cherone as a frontman, and I didn't listen to the album again for about a year or 6 months. I listened to it one more time. I was like, actually, I'm not into this. Quite weird. There's another one, Nirvana at the Mayfair. I've just had to write that down. I've got the date somewhere. I think it's late 91. This was one of them, like, obviously Nirvana broke big, a few people were going. And this is a weird thing where I've seen a band, this is like Guns N' Roses thing, where I've seen a band absolutely in the moment when they're just about going stratospheric, but you can still see them in a smaller venue or a festival like Guns N' Roses, but I'm not actually that bothered. Nirvana's complete antithesis of what I was into. People, I found it quite funny that people, were sort of jumping around to Teen Spirit, where it's a kind of, the Teen Spirit lyrics I've always thought of a satire of kind of teen behaviour at gigs. Yeah, so this would be a gig where loads of people would love to see this gig. I've seen it, but, it wasn't for me. But it was an interesting experience in that. It was the same with Rage Against the Machine as well. Again, I saw them at the Mayfair. It was a free gig, I think. I think the singer in the band was in got us free entry. And obviously they're doing "fuck you, I won't do what you tell me." No one's going "fuck you, I don't do what you tell me." And it's like, well, you're doing exactly what they tell you. Anyway, it's a cool one. Again, terrible ticket, UFO, Reformation, Michael Schenker, City Hall 98. So I hadn't seen Schenker at this point. I'd been a Schenker fan when I was younger. Obviously, by the time I was old enough to go to gigs, Schenker had kind of fallen by the wayside. I kind of got back into my classic rock early 90s, and UFO, one of my favourites that I rediscovered and got more into deeply. So this was great to see Schenker. They played a fantastic set, UFO. They're only missing Andy Parker on drums. It was Simon Wright. I remember Schenker kind of had a bob and his hair dyed black, which was quite weird. But oddly enough, I bought tickets for the left-hand side, right-hand side facing of the stage because I thought Schenker would play on that side. I didn't realise in UFO because I hadn't seen the video footage that he played on the other side, so I was kind of to look over. But he was tremendous. It was really cool. I played Electric Phase and one more for the Rodeo, which are the two deep cuts I played that night. After that, they just always play the Strange in the Night stuff, which gets a bit repetitive. Yeah, let's the next UFO gig, we'll look at that there. This is where we're now. This is from 2000 at City Hall. Schenker, Udi John Roth supported. I hadn't seen him before. This was great. Udi was amazing to see him. UFO came out and there was only 3 of them from the previous gig. Paul Raymond had gone. It was clear something was up with Schenker. He just wasn't into it. His playing wasn't very good that night, apart from Out in the Field solo was great. And the next night, did he get punched after this gig? Spike was at the gig backstage, like, who the fuck is Spike? Spike from the Choir Boys punched him and he had a black eye the next gig, I think in Manchester, could be wrong. I think a lot of people think he had a black eye at this gig, but I don't think he did. But this was in the era of Schenker where he started drinking again and was just, being pretty shitty. And I saw him at another gig with the Scorpions where I knew the first 30 seconds going, he was pissed off his head, because he's absolutely tanking a solo for Armed and Ready, and it was pretty shocking. But he sorted himself out. Next gig, £14.50 Dio, 2002 at the Manchester Academy. So this was a real sort of moment for me because I bought the Killing a Dragon album, principally because I had Doug Aldridge on guitar, who I was a big fan of. And I thought, I really want to go to the gig, so should I go to this gig? I was down at my parents', and I didn't have a car at the time, but I'd passed my driving test a few years before. And they said, well, you borrowed the car to go to Manchester. I hadn't actually driven to Manchester, so it was a bit of a kind of exciting, nervous thing. But anyway, I managed to get there and park near where my brother lived, and he came with me. I bumped into my mate Ronnie, who ended up being a drummer in a band I was in, a couple of bands, which was really good. I didn't know he was a Dio fan. And it was just great to see Doug Aldridge. This was, obviously at this time, Doug Aldridge was just getting known. Before this, he'd been like a cult player in Lion and Bad Moon Rising, so players didn't know how good he was, but the Dio thing and eventually Whitesnake thing got him further exposure. But it was great to see Dio as well. They played all the classic songs. It was brilliant, and I just felt so lucky to see Dio in a venue like that. It was absolutely brilliant. And I drove back like a bat out of hell. I got back in an hour from Manchester, which is good. And then, just looking on here, it's generally just a mixture of things really, but we'll find another one. Here we are. Now here's just the worst kind of ticket. This is from 2005. This is the Metro Radio Arena. You just wouldn't know. It's Judas Priest and the Scorpions. But this was a real comeback at heavy metal gig for me. We'd seen Iron Maiden a couple of years before the arena, and that was packed out for the Dance of Death. But what was good about this is you had the Priest and the Scorpions doing a double header. Scorpions played over an hour and Priest headlined. But there was enough about his band to, it was a long way from filling off the arena. It was probably 4,000 or 5,000 people in there. What I remember about this, I was there for the Priest first and foremost, coming back on the Angel Retribution tour, but of course the Scorpions had come out of Unbreakable, which was a good record. But when the Scorpions came out, it was just incredible. They just hit the stage running and we were just blown away. It was like, they rolled back the years. It was just like, and no time had passed since it's him on the Savage Amusement tour, which was at the Birmingham NEC. They did a brilliant set. Matthias Jabs, I remember my mate just reached over and just held my hand when Jabs was soloing. Then we got Priest, and Priest was really good. I mean, in all truth, Priest got beaten by the Scorpions. You could still see Priest had come back, but you could still see there's a little flatness there. I think Halford had back problems, and there's probably tension between KK and Glenn. The time after I saw Priest, which was the Albert Hall, and the time after that at the NEC with Megadeth and Testament, they were better. But I was still chuffed to bits just to see Priest. I just never thought I'd see Judas Priest again in an arena. Because of what happened with grunge and new metal in the 90s, we just didn't think these bands would come back. But at the end of the night, the concept of classic rock started, and then you kind of got classic metal and legacy bands, and these are legacy bands. UFO, Judas Priest, Iron Maiden, and so on. Here's another weird one. This is, I was on holiday in New York, and this was the second time I saw Europe. We were looking through the listings as to what was on in New York, and we were with another couple holidaying. We had a few days in New York, and they decided to go and see a Broadway show, and we were like, well, should we go and see Europe at BB King's? And it was weird. This is BB King's bar, kind of franchise bar, and you had your dinner, sat down, and then watched the band, almost like dinner theatre. But Europe were really good. They were on the Start From the Dark comeback album, which in hindsight's not that great, but I played a lot of tracks of that. The band were really tight, the sounded really good. I'd seen them with King Marcello and Out of This World too, which was one of my favourite gigs at the time, back in the 89 at the Manchester Apollo. But it was just great to see them. And when we did the final countdown, or they did the final countdown, everyone stood up on their seats, their posh, nice bar diner seats, and we all jumped up and down. And that was just really interesting. The only time I've seen a band abroad, really, I think. And let's have a look. This is quite an interesting one. I saw Satriani at the City Hall, and I got a free meet and greet, so I actually got to meet him. He just came around the stalls at the start of the gig. He came in early. He wore gloves. The guy said the pre-check people, don't shake his hand too hard. I was thinking, yeah, fair blood enough. Nice guy, which is amazing when you get up close to him. He's quite slight, quite small, but it's just those eyes are amazing. And yeah, I think that's another interesting one. Actually, Journey at the City Hall in Newcastle, again, generic tickets. So this was like Journey had to part company with Steve O'Geary. They were touring a tour, things were going wrong with his voice, and they got Jeff Scott Soto in, who did a really good job of kind of singing that style, because he tends to sing a slightly low register now. Really good front man, and it was an excellent show, and I just thought, this is great with Jeff Scott Soto singing. But then he just got let go. Neil Schon was a friend. It just went all quiet, and they got Arnold Pineda in, who had obviously a legacy voice. And again, talking about legacy bands, Journey kind of showed the way there of looking for a singer who's a sound alike, and you get your legacy singer in. And Queensryche did the same with Todd LaTorre. But really good gig. When I went to see him again, Don't Stop Believing had kicked off because of Glee, because of The Sopranos. They played the arena, much bigger venue, but Arnold Pineda didn't cut it as a front man. The Jeff Scott Soto gig was much better. Yeah, so that's there's a few there. I've got a few other ones here, which I'll show you. Well, let's just have a look here. Just a weird one. This is Goblin. At the time, I was recording a second album with a band I was in called Vendetta. Now, was it the other album? No, it was our third album. And Goblin, the band who did the soundtracks for Dario Argento films, Dawn of the Dead, like an Italian prog rock band. So this is weird, just a weird, quirky gig that you sometimes get, and these are the sort of bands that very rarely turn. They played Hall 2, a venue called the Sage on a Glass House in Newcastle. So it's a really good show, actually. It was really interesting because they had the back projections of clips from the films that they'd done soundtracks for. So that was just really good. The guitar sound, a really horrible guitar sound. He had like a Fender amp with just the distortion off the old Fender amp, which wasn't great. Another good one here, Winger 2010 on the Karma Tour. Again, a band I hadn't seen, but this would be another example where a band just sound like the record again, along with the Queensryche, along with King's X gig. These guys, they're good, but it's not until you see them live you realise how good they are. And it just makes you more angry about like how they got like kind of mistreated in the grunge era, but they were absolutely spot on, brilliant backing vocals, but reproduced all the songs great, put on a great show, great set list, really good. And finally, we'll look at that one. It's Queen and Adam Lambert. So obviously controversy, people go, it's not Queen. Well, I always think, well, it's Queen and Adam Lambert. They're not saying they're Queen. But what was weird about this was I went out New Year's Eve, got pissed with my wife, went back to the house, and Queen and Adam Lambert were doing the New Year show, New Year's Eve on BBC, and we were like, oh, this sounds really good. Bloody hell, I can't believe how well this guy sings. He does do a really good job. And it was like, I went for the tour and we looked it up, and you know, drunk and stupid, we spent 80 quid on tickets. And woke up the next day, it's like, we just spent 80 quid, 69 quid and £11 booking fee. But anyway, it was a good gig, and I got to see Brian May, and I'm glad I went. It was nothing like the proper Queen. But it was a decent show. But what was interesting, even for that, you're paying 69 quid plus booking fee, which is 2015. You would be paying double, probably triple that now, the price of gig tickets. And that's really my rule with gig tickets. When I started going to gigs, the Aussie gig was £6.50 see Aussie. That's about 20 quid in today's money. Now you've got to pay over 200 quid. So when I'm going to a gig, I kind of set a limit of, you know, no more than 100 quid. And I just paid 105 quid to Iron Maiden, which is in the summer. But yeah, so that's my little tour through tickets there. I hope you enjoyed that, and I'll see you again soon.